I stopped counting the days after the first year, not because I lost track, because it didn't matter anymore. The door's still sealed, the air still tastes like recycled metal, and the people who remember what sunlight looks like are starting to die off. We were supposed to wait it out, that's what they told us. But nobody ever said what happens when the waiting becomes the only thing left. I was 14 when the door closed. I remember the sound, not a slam, but a smooth, hydraulic hiss that felt engineered to be calming. The Vault-Tec representative who sealed us in wore a blue suit and smiled the entire time. He explained the lockdown procedure like he was describing how to operate a microwave. 3 months, he said, maybe 6 if the fallout patterns shifted. We'd know when it was safe because the all-clear signal would sound and the door would open automatically. He made it sound like waiting for a bus. My mother held my hand in the processing line. She kept saying we were lucky. Vault 47 had been reserved for government contractors and their families, which meant my father's work at the pre-war munitions plant had saved our lives. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I was standing in a metal tube being lowered into the ground while the world ended above us. The first month, people talked about outside constantly. They clustered in the atrium, sharing theories about which cities got hit, how long the radiation would linger, whether the government had survived. Someone claimed they'd heard that vault doors were designed to open from the inside after 90 days, regardless of external conditions, a fail-safe in case the automated systems malfunctioned. That rumor spread through the residential sections like a religion. People started counting down. 91 days after the door closed, nothing happened. The overseer, a man named Hendricks who'd been a middle manager at some telecommunications company, held an assembly in the atrium. He stood behind a podium that had been welded together from cafeteria tables and explained that the external sensors were still detecting unsafe radiation levels. The door would remain sealed until conditions improved. He didn't say how long that might take. When someone asked about the fail-safe, Hendricks looked confused. He said Vault-Tec had never mentioned any such mechanism. The door opened when the computer determined it was safe, not before. I watched my mother's face during that announcement. She didn't react, just stood there with her hands folded, staring at Hendricks like he was speaking a language she used to know but had forgotten. The schedule helped at first. Wake-up tone at 0600, breakfast from 0630 to 0730. Work assignments from 0800 to 1600. Dinner. Recreation. Lights out at 2200. The Vault's designers had anticipated a need for structure, and Hendricks enforced it with a bureaucratic thoroughness that people found comforting. There were job rotations, maintenance, food service, hydroponics, water reclamation. Everyone contributed. Everyone had a role. I was assigned to maintenance detail because I was young and could fit into the narrower ventilation shafts. Most of my time was spent replacing air filters, checking pipe joints for corrosion, wiping down conduits. The work was simple, repetitive. I learned to navigate the vault's mechanical guts the way other people knew the residential hallways. Sometimes I'd find myself in spaces where I could hear conversations from adjacent rooms, voices filtering through the ductwork. I learned not to listen too carefully. People said things in private that they wouldn't say in the cafeteria, and knowing those things didn't make living with them any easier. Year 2. The hydroponics yield dropped, not catastrophically, just enough that portions shrank. The overseer adjusted the rationing schedule and assured everyone that engineering was working on optimizing the growing lights. No one starved, but no one felt full either. I noticed people eating more slowly, chewing longer, trying to make each meal last. My father started spending extra shifts in the machine shop, fabricating parts for the water recyclers. He'd come back to our quarters with his hands covered in grease, smelling like metal and sweat. He didn't talk much anymore. None of the adults did. They moved through the schedule like automatons, performing their tasks with a mechanical precision that seemed less like discipline and more like forgetting how to stop. The children adapted faster. We created games, territories, hierarchies. The vault became our entire geography. The atrium was the capital. The lower maintenance levels were the frontier. The overseer's office was forbidden territory that we dare each other to approach. We invented mythologies about the surface, stories that grew more fantastical the longer we were sealed in. Some kids claimed their parents had seen footage of green grass regrowing through the ash. Others insisted the radiation had created monsters that patrolled the wasteland, hunting for anyone who tried to leave. No one had seen any footage. The vault's external cameras had failed during the first year, corroded by something in the air outside. The monitors in the security office showed nothing but static. Year 4. A man named Kellerman tried to open the door manually. He'd been an engineer before the war, worked on industrial hydraulics. He spent weeks studying the door mechanism, mapping the control systems, tracing power conduits. He gave a presentation to the overseer, explaining that the automated lockdown could be overridden with a manual release sequence. Hendricks listened politely, then had Kellerman removed from engineering and reassigned to waste reclamation. Kellerman tried anyway. He waited until the night shift, accessed the door controls, and initiated the override sequence. Alarms screamed through every section of the vault. Security, a rotating group of residents with batons and no real training, dragged Kellerman away from the control panel before the sequence completed. I was 17 by then, working the overnight maintenance shift in a section near the entrance. I heard the alarms, felt the vibration through the walls as the door's hydraulics engaged, then disengaged. I heard Kellerman screaming that we had a right to choose, that keeping us sealed in wasn't protection, it was imprisonment. They put him in isolation for a month. When he came out, he didn't speak. Just shuffled through his waste reclamation shifts with his head down, avoiding eye contact. After Kellerman, the overseer implemented new security protocols. Access to the door controls required authorization from 3 separate departments. Guards were posted near the entrance at all times. Hendricks gave another assembly, his voice calm and reasonable, explaining that premature exposure to radiation would kill everyone. The door stayed closed for our safety. We needed to trust the system, trust Vault-Tec's engineering, trust the sensors that monitored the outside world. I asked my mother if she believed him. She was folding laundry in our quarters, smoothing out jumpsuits with the same methodical care she'd once used on church clothes. She didn't look at me when she answered. She said it didn't matter what she believed. The door was sealed. We lived here now. Belief was irrelevant. Year 6. My father died. Not from violence or disease, just exhaustion. His heart stopped during a maintenance shift, a failure so quiet that no one noticed until he didn't show up for dinner. They found him slumped against a water pipe, tools still in his hands. The medical officer, a former veterinarian, said it was a coronary event, probably stress-related. They cremated him in the incinerator used for organic waste. There wasn't room for a cemetery. My mother didn't cry. She attended the memorial service Hendricks organized, listened to the platitudes about sacrifice and duty, then went back to her hydroponics shift. I tried to talk to her about it later, but she looked at me with eyes that seemed focused on something beyond the walls, beyond the vault, beyond anywhere I could reach. She said the work schedule didn't allow for grief. People depended on the crops. She had responsibilities. I stopped trying to comfort her after that. The younger generation started having children. Not many. The overseer had implemented a population control policy, birth quotas determined by resource availability, but enough that the residential sections echoed with infant crying. The sound was jarring at first, intrusive. We'd grown used to the vault's mechanical ambience, the hum of ventilation and recycled air. The cries felt organic, wrong, like something from a world we'd left behind. I was 23 when I realized I couldn't remember what the sun looked like. I remembered the concept bright, hot, yellow, but the actual sensory experience had faded. I tried to reconstruct it from memory, but all I could conjure was the flat, even light of the vault's overhead panels. Cold, shadowless, eternal. Year 9. The first suicide. A woman named Chen, who'd worked in food service, hanged herself in a storage closet using electrical cable. She left no note. The overseer held a brief memorial, reminded everyone about the vault's mental health resources, a single counselor who'd been a high school guidance advisor before the war and adjusted the work schedules to cover Chen's absence. After Chen, the suicides came more frequently, never dramatic, never announced, just people who quietly removed themselves from the population, usually during the night shift when the hallways were empty. Security stopped reporting them individually. The overseer issued a memo about recognizing signs of distress in fellow residents and instituted a buddy system for night workers. The buddy system didn't stop anything, it just meant people died in pairs sometimes. I was assigned to the water reclamation section by then, monitoring filtration systems and checking for bacterial contamination. The work was mindless, which made it tolerable. I'd stand in front of the purification tanks for hours, watching murky water cycle through membranes and emerge clean on the other side. The process felt like a metaphor, though for what, I couldn't articulate. One night, during a routine check, I found a section of pipe that shouldn't have existed. It was behind an access panel I'd never needed to open, a narrow conduit that didn't appear on any of the maintenance schematics. I followed it through a crawl space so tight I had to move sideways, my shoulders scraping against metal. The conduit led to a sealed room I didn't know the vault contained. Inside were filing cabinets, rows of them, each drawer labeled with dates. I opened one at random and found paperwork, personnel files, psychological evaluations, incident reports, all dated from before the door closed. I pulled another drawer, more files, medical records, behavioral assessments, screening results from the Vault-Tec application process. The last cabinet contained a single folder marked Operational Parameters. I opened it. The Vault 47 social experiment was designed to study long-term psychological effects of indefinite isolation on a population that believed rescue was imminent. Residents were to be kept sealed for a minimum of 50 years, regardless of external conditions. The door's automated systems were programmed never to open. All sensor data indicating unsafe radiation levels was falsified. The experiment's purpose was to document social decay, leadership corruption, and the point at which a population would turn violent or collapse entirely. The folder included psychological projections, predicted timelines for when the population would begin showing signs of collective psychosis, when suicides would peak, when violence would emerge. It included contingency protocols for what to do if residents attempted to breach the door. It included observer notes from the Vault's original designers, clinical assessments of which personality types would provide the most interesting data under prolonged stress. It included a note from the overseer, not Hendricks, the original overseer, the one who'd been in charge when the door closed. His name was Carver. The note was addressed to his successor, instructions for maintaining the experiment's integrity. Whoever held the overseer position was to enforce the lockdown, suppress dissent, and document all behavioral changes. They were to prevent anyone from accessing the truth about the door's controls. They were to maintain the fiction that the Vault's purpose was protection. The note was dated 3 days before Carver's death. The death had been listed as natural causes in the official records. I sat in that hidden room for hours, reading through files, cross-referencing dates, piecing together the architecture of our imprisonment. Every procedural decision Hendricks had made, every security protocol, every schedule adjustment, it all aligned with the experiment's design. Whether Hendricks knew the full truth or had simply inherited the role and its mandates, the result was identical. We were rats in a maze, and the exit had never existed. I took the operational parameters folder. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd show people that the truth would matter somehow. I crawled back through the maintenance passages, the folder tucked inside my jumpsuit, and returned to my quarters. My mother was there, sitting on her bunk, staring at the wall. She did that sometimes now, just sat and stared like she was watching something play out that only she could see. I showed her the folder. She looked at the papers the way someone might look at an insect with mild, detached curiosity. She read the experiment's parameters, the psychological projections, the notes about maintaining operational security. When she finished, she handed the folder back to me. "Did you tell anyone else?" she asked. I said no. "Good," she said. "Don't." I asked her why. She stood up, moved to the small desk in our quarters, and began organizing her few possessions with the same methodical care she brought to everything. "Because it won't change anything," she said. "The door is still sealed. We're still here. Knowing why doesn't give us a way out. It just makes it harder to keep going." I argued. I said people deserved to know, that the truth mattered, that we could force Hendricks to open the door, that we could override the systems, that we could choose to leave even if the surface was still dangerous. My mother looked at me with something like pity. "And go where?" she asked. "We don't know what's out there. We don't know if anything survived. Opening the door might kill us all." She paused, hands resting on a folded jumpsuit. "At least here we have structure, rules, a way to keep living. The truth doesn't give us anything except pain." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That living inside a lie was worse than facing an uncertain reality. But I looked around our quarters, the narrow bunk, the recycled air, the fluorescent lights that never dimmed, and realized she was right about one thing. The truth didn't give us a way out. It just added another layer of weight to carry. I burned the folder in the incinerator the next day. Year 12, Hendricks died. Stroke, the medical officer said. They held an election for the next overseer. A woman named Ruiz won, a former school administrator who promised stability and continuity. Her first act was to reinforce the door security protocols and extend the work schedule by 2 hours to compensate for declining hydroponics yields. Nothing changed. Year 15. The children who'd been born in the vault started asking questions about the outside. They'd heard stories from their parents, second-hand myths about a world that no longer made sense to them. They asked what trees were, what rain felt like, why the sky was blue. The adults struggled to explain. How do you describe wind to someone who's only ever felt recycled air? How do you explain horizons to people raised inside metal walls? The children adapted by creating their own culture. They spoke a dialect that mixed pre-war English with technical jargon from the vault's systems. They developed rituals around the schedule changes, marking time by shifts and maintenance cycles rather than days or months. They built shrines in the lower levels, assembling discarded machine parts into sculptures they claimed represented the spirits of the vault. When the adults asked what that meant, the children couldn't articulate it. They just said it felt right. I was 37 when I stopped counting years. The calendar felt arbitrary, a remnant of a world that no longer existed. Time moved in cycles, now wake-up tones, shifts, meals, sleep. The numbers changed on the vault's internal clocks, but the routine stayed constant. I worked my maintenance shifts, ate my rations, slept in my bunk. I watched people age, die, get replaced by younger residents who'd never known anything except the vault. My mother died quietly in her sleep. No ceremony, no memorial, just a notation in the medical logs and a vacancy in the hydroponics rotation. I found myself relieved. Not because I didn't love her, but because her absence felt cleaner than her presence had become. Toward the end, she'd stopped speaking entirely, moving through her shifts like a mechanism running on momentum alone. I scattered her ashes in the water reclamation tanks. It seemed appropriate. The second generation reached adulthood. They were different from us, leaner, paler, adapted to the vault's environment in ways that felt biological rather than behavioral. They walked with a slight hunch, shoulders rounded from navigating low-ceilinged corridors. Their eyes had adjusted to artificial light. Some complained that the standard-issue bulbs were too bright. They spoke in quieter voices, conserving energy in an environment where noise had nowhere to dissipate. They also stopped asking about the outside. I don't know when it happened, the shift from imprisonment to normalcy. Maybe it was gradual, each generation born in the vault having less connection to the world before. Maybe it was inevitable, but at some point, the sealed door stopped being a source of anxiety and became simply a feature of the architecture. The younger residents passed it during their shifts without glancing up, the way you might walk past a load-bearing wall, functional, permanent, irrelevant. Ruiz retired as overseer. A man named Torres took over, then a woman named Kemp. The transitions were smooth, unremarkable. Each new overseer enforced the same protocols, maintained the same schedules, gave the same speeches about unity and survival. If they knew about the experiment, about the door's true purpose, they never indicated it. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe the knowledge had died with Carver, buried in sealed rooms that only maintenance workers stumbled across. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. I found myself thinking about that hidden room sometimes, during long shifts in the water reclamation section. I wondered if the observation data was still being collected, if somewhere in the Vault's computer systems, behavioral metrics were being logged and transmitted to receivers that no longer existed. Or maybe the experiment had ended when communication with the outside world became impossible. Maybe we'd outlived our purpose as test subjects and were now just people living in a box, unobserved and forgotten. The thought should have been liberating. Instead, it felt like another kind of erasure. Year 40-something. I stopped maintaining the count. The Vault's clocks still tracked days, but I'd lost the context that made numbers meaningful. I was old by then, though I couldn't say exactly how old. The Vault's records listed my birth date, but the number felt detached from my experience of time. I worked reduced shifts in maintenance, mostly supervisory roles, teaching younger residents how to navigate the ductwork and identify failing systems. They treated me with a distant respect, the way you might regard a piece of outdated equipment that still functioned. I knew things they didn't: pre-war terminology, obsolete repair techniques, stories about the early years that had become mythology. They listened politely, filed the information away, then adapted it to fit their understanding of how the world worked. To them, the Vault wasn't a shelter or a prison. It was simply the world. The sealed door wasn't keeping them trapped. It was keeping the chaos outside from getting in. They'd built entire belief systems around the Vault's purpose, narratives that gave meaning to the schedule, the rationing, the endless maintenance cycles. They believed they were preserving something important, that their survival had significance beyond simple endurance. I envied them. A young woman named Soha approached me one day during a maintenance shift. She was third generation, born 20 years after the door sealed, and she worked in the archives, organizing the Vault's records. She'd found inconsistencies in the early documentation, gaps in the timeline that didn't align with the official history. She wanted to know what I remembered about the first years. I told her I didn't remember much. That memory faded, details blurred together, that the early years felt like something that had happened to a different person. She didn't believe me. She pushed, asking specific questions about the door's closure, about Hendrix, about the rumors of failed escape attempts. She'd heard stories, fragments passed down through generations, and she wanted verification. I asked her why it mattered. She said she wanted to understand the truth, that the Vault's history belonged to everyone, that knowing where they came from would help them understand where they were going. I almost laughed. Where were we going? The door was sealed. The outside world, whatever remained of it, was inaccessible. Our destination was the same as our origin, here, always here. But I didn't say that. I looked at Soha, at her earnest expression and her need for narrative coherence, and I understood that the truth she was searching for wasn't about facts. It was about meaning. She needed to believe that the Vault had a purpose, that their existence amounted to something more than biological persistence. So I told her what she wanted to hear. I confirmed the official history that we'd sealed ourselves in to escape the war, that the overseer had made difficult choices to ensure survival, that the door would open when it was safe. I reinforced the story that let her sleep at night. She thanked me and returned to her archival work, satisfied. I went back to my quarters and sat on my bunk, staring at the wall the way my mother used to. I thought about the folder I'd burned decades ago, about the operational parameters and psychological projections. I wondered if this was how the experiment had been designed to end, not with violence or revolt, but with acceptance. A population so adapted to captivity that freedom became irrelevant. I wondered if we'd failed the experiment or passed it. The lights in my quarters hummed, a steady electrical drone that I'd long since stopped noticing. Somewhere in the vault, the night shift was beginning. Somewhere, people were eating dinner, talking quietly, going through the motions of living. The door stood sealed, its hydraulic mechanisms dormant, waiting for a signal that would never come. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sun. Nothing came, just the afterimage of fluorescent panels, burning white against my eyelids. I'm 60-something now, or 70, or older. The number doesn't matter. I work minimal shifts, mostly paperwork, updating maintenance logs that no one reads. My hands shake from nerve damage, years of repetitive stress wearing down the connections between intention and action. I move slowly through the corridors, recognizing fewer faces each year. The fourth generation is reaching adulthood. They're smaller than we were, their bodies compact and efficient, optimized for an environment where resources are scarce and space is limited. They move through the vault with an ease that seems choreographed, never colliding, never hesitating. They've internalized the architecture completely. They don't know what they're missing because they've never known anything else. Sometimes I stand near the sealed door during my shifts. Not because I want to leave, I wouldn't know how to survive outside even if it opened, but because it's the only part of the vault that still feels like a question. Everything else has been answered, categorized, integrated into the rhythm of survival. But the door remains ambiguous, a threshold that might lead somewhere or nowhere. A young man saw me standing there once, asked if I was all right. He looked concerned, like he thought I might be having a medical episode. I told him I was fine, just resting. He nodded and continued past, boots echoing against metal flooring. He didn't even glance at the door. I think about that moment often. The way he looked at me with worry but looked through the door like it was wallpaper. The absolute absence of curiosity about what might exist on the other side. And I realized that the experiment succeeded beyond its designers' projections. They thought we'd break, that isolation would fracture us into violence or madness. But we didn't break. We adapted. We built systems, created meaning, transformed a cage into a world. We became the vault, and the vault became us. The door is just a door now. Metal and hydraulics, a functional component of the structure. It doesn't represent escape or imprisonment. It doesn't symbolize anything. It simply is, the way the walls are, the way the air recyclers are, present, permanent, unquestioned. I'll die here, not violently, not tragically, just quietly, during some shift or sleep period, my body giving out the way machinery does after decades of operation. They'll note my death in the medical logs, cremate me, redistribute my quarters. The vault will continue. It always continues. Sometimes, late in the sleep cycle when the corridors are empty, I can hear the door, not opening, not breaking, just existing. The metal contracts and expands with temperature changes, producing sounds so faint they're almost imaginary. A whisper of possibility that means nothing. I listen anyway. Because even now, after everything, some part of me still remembers that there was supposed to be another side, that the door was meant to open, that this was supposed to be temporary. But memory is just another system breaking down, another component wearing out, and eventually, even that will stop. The lights hum, the air circulates, the schedule continues. The door stays sealed. And we stay here, living our small lives in our small world, having forgotten we ever knew how to want something larger.